Guys, I know that this is ugly. I can change it now. Sorry. Okay, anyway. Hey guys, my name is Victoria. Welcome back to my channel. Today we will be talking about all the 100 books. Oh my god. I read this year or listened to. Today is the 27th of December, so technically the year is not done, and I do see myself finishing maybe 2 more books, but I need to film this in order to edit it to be part of the marathon that's going on. As I said, we're going to talk about all the books, and I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm quickly going to say the name, the stars I gave it, and maybe 1 or 2 sentences. I try to keep it as short as possible. My goal for this year was actually 25 books. And yeah, I think I succeeded. We're going to start with some stats that I have on my app. I use Storygraph. As I said, I read 100 books. Storygraph tells me that I read mainly fiction books, which is not a surprise at all, that are emotional, reflective, and adventurous. I typically choose medium-paced books that are 300 to 499 pages long. Let's get into my stats. So I'm going to insert a picture. You can see the moods and numbers of pages I read. Apparently I read 32,362 pages. I did not count, though I think that's a good number. I gotta say, I did not read every single page of this. I listened to a lot of books. So my top 3 genres are LGBTQIA+, which is amazing, young adult, and fantasy. My biggest reading month was March. Let's get into more specific things. The shortest book that I read, which I also listened to, was by Agatha Christie, which was 25 pages. But if we go into the category of print, it's The Cant of a Ghost by Oscar Wilde with 46 pages, which I read. The longest book, Queen of Air and Darkness, with 912 pages, but I listened to the book, so the longest book I really read was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I do kind of have thick book fear, so I think this is all the stats we're going to go into. So let's start with all the books that I read. We're going to go month by month. I think this is the easiest. Let's start with January, in which I read 10 books. The first book I read this year was Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Really loved it, 5 stars. The second one was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Cried my ass off, 5 stars. And then came a bunch of very terrible poetry books. Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. Not deserving of 1 star, but I gave it 1 star because I have to, but actually I wouldn't give it 1 star. The Sun and Red Flowers deserves a star because I did find some things that were pretty in there. And Homebody, which also doesn't deserve a star because it was really bad, in my opinion. Rupi Kaur. Another poetry collection that I really loved, which I gave 5 stars, is I Would Leave Me If I Could by Halsey. Loved this. Listen to it every day. I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which was a lot of fun. Gave it 3.5 stars. Really, really liked it. I read it with Julie. Next one is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I gave it 3 stars, so yeah, that's a nice book. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. 4.75 stars. Loved this book by Benjamin Eliasens. Red, White, and Royal Blue, Casey McQuiston, a book that I really, really want to read again. I gave it 4.5 stars. And I think this is already what we have in January. I finished 8 books in February, which is the month of my birthday. I read 2 thrillers, which are specifically Neuschwanstein thrillers. They are about the famous castle by Ludwig II, King of Bavaria. I live in Bavaria in Germany. Been in that castle many times, and I don't live too far away from it now. So yeah, I read Ins Herz and Ohne Herz by Markus Richter, who we actually met. That was cool. I really, really loved those. They were amazing, and I really want to read them again. I gave these 2 thrillers 3.5 stars. I did like them. Honestly, I could give them 4. I'm just gonna give them 4. Continuing with Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertelli. A book that is in my most disappointing reads of 2021. It wasn't a bad book and I did enjoy it. And when I talk about how it was disappointing, it's simply because I fell in love with the movie like years ago. Back then I got 3 stars, now I would give it 2.75. Sad. Somehow it doesn't make sense. Like, I loved the story in the movie, but I just couldn't connect to the characters in the book. It really makes no sense. Next one, which is also on that list, The Witch Doesn't Burn in This One by Amanda Lovelace. No, I don't want to talk about this again. After that I read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. 5 stars, I loved it, even though I always say it because I just don't feel comfortable with not saying it. This is not a good representation of a dissociative identity disorder. I also feel like that disorder is not a modern term anymore. If you know the correct term, please let me know, because I honestly can't remember right now. But again, it's not a very accurate and good representation. It really shines a bad light upon DID, and that's not what it is at all. Just want to say that it was still a very interesting book, and it was a classic that I really loved reading. It's very sweet and short and is just exciting to read. But again, I do want to say that all the time. Next one, The Cant of a Ghost by Oscar Wilde, 5 stars. I really liked it. Next, I read The Bottle Imp by Robert Louis Stevenson. It was in my copy of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And this was such a fun story. I did not actually give it any stars, but now remembering it, I think I gave it like 3.75 or 4 stars. It was really good. The last book I read in February was Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertelli. This is about one of the best friends of Simon, and I did like this more than Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. So yeah, I did like this. I give it 3 stars. March was my strongest reading month. I did a whole vlog reading a book every day in a week that I was really miserable in, but these books were a great distraction. I started with Vanessa Yu's Magical Paris Tea Shop by Roselle Lim. I gave this 3.5 stars. I like the story, I like the characters, although sometimes a bit too convenient for me. The next book I read was Percy Jackson Diebe im Olymp by Rick Riordan. I listened to them in German, the audiobook app that I always use, and they only have the abridged version, which really sucks, so I do think I have to read this again someday. I gave this 4 stars because I really liked it, and I do think that I need to someday really read the entire saga, because the next book was the second one, which I also gave 4 stars. I really liked it. It's Im Bann des Zyklopen. The next one was one of my highlights. I read The Song of Achilles finally by Madeline Miller. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. A retelling of the Iliad in Patroclus's perspective. The next one I read was also one of my favorites, The House Without Windows by Barbara Newhall Follett. Gave it 4 stars. It's about a girl leaving home and then escaping to nature and then in the end living there. It was a very nice short book, and I have a beautiful copy, and if you're a fan of nature, I highly recommend this. The next one was so disappointing. I mentioned it and I talked about this in my top 10 most disappointing books of this year. 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanf. Is the E mute? I don't know. I expected more. I got bored after a while, and sadly I just did not like the protagonist. So sad. Next one was also so disappointing. Writers and Lovers by Lily King, and I see here that I gave it 4 stars. What? No, I would say this was like 2.5 stars for me. Sadly, I just couldn't connect to any of these characters, but I read this on a very bad day, filled with panic attacks, and this book was a good distraction from that. Yeah, I just didn't find all the beautiful and special things that people talked about, and I also had very high expectations, so that's the reason why it fell flat for me. Still glad I read it, and I do want to re-experience it someday. Next one was The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street, which is a sequel to 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanf. I gave this 3.75 stars. I really liked it. It's the same protagonist, but this time she comes to London, and I really did like this one. I read so many good books in March, because the next one was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I gave this 4 stars. I loved it. Sometimes it was a bit slow paced, but the writing made up for it. It's so beautiful, and definitely for people who really love literature and language. I read a dystopian novel by George Orwell, and I read 1984 by him in English class 2 years ago in my A-levels. Honestly, wasn't a huge fan of it. I'm just not a huge fan of dystopian novels in general, but I did like this one. I give it 3 stars. So Animal Farm was the next read, and yeah, I did like it. The next one was a book that I talked with a friend about for a pretty long time. The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, a book that is dearly loved by a lot of people, and at first I gave it 4 stars. While reading it, I really did like it. And I would not say that I dislike it now. I don't think I will read it again though, because the whole plot was very predictable, and I feel like the idea of this library wasn't explored enough. Even though everything happens in this library, but it also doesn't. It was just very predictable, but still a book that I, while reading it, enjoyed. I'm going to switch places now because my back starts to hurt. Next one I read is Loveless by Alice Oseman. I talked about this multiple times on my channel. 5 stars. I loved it. I've never related to a character more than to Georgia, and it's also in my top 10 of the best books that I read this year. I also read Little Women in March by Louisa May Alcott, and I really did like it. And this book just felt like a cozy blanket. I loved it. I read Dandelion and Adultolescence by Gabby Hanna. Adultolescence being her first and Dandelion being her second book, both of which I did not really enjoy. Pillow Thoughts by Courtney Pepperell was also one of the typical Instagram modern poetry that I feel like simply copy Tumblr posts or tweets and put it in a book and call it poetry, which is really harsh, but I do think that Courtney Peppernill had great potential. It did have some lovely imagery at some parts, but it just needs editing. Love a Wild by Atticus is a poetry collection that I really hated. It's not in my most disappointing books because I do not want to remember this, which sounds really bad, but I felt like this book was really one that felt so pretentious and didn't like it at all. And the last book I read in March was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which in reflection I did not enjoy really. And the characters in the books just kind of fell flat for me. April, oh my god, this is taking so long. Okay, the first book I read, and it was the first audiobook I listened to, Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall, a book I really loved, a love story that is so fun. I can't wait for the second part, which is coming out next year, which is called Husband Material, and you have me with this title, okay? I gave Boyfriend Material 4 stars, by the way. Double Indemnity by James M. Cain was the next book I read. I gave this 3 stars. I really liked it. The story about committing the perfect murder and then covering it up. I really liked listening to it, and the audiobook I had for it was really good in my opinion. The next book I read, which was one of the highlights of this year, was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I gave it 5 stars. I love this book so much, and I will read it over and over again. Whee! Next one, which was really disappointing, Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I gave this 2 stars because I did like some stuff that was in the books, but again, I'm just not a huge fan of dystopian novels. The next one was a fun, sort of romance in a way. Maybe One Day by Debbie Johnson, a very easy audiobook that I listened to. I really enjoyed the story of a woman searching and trying to find her long lost love. So yeah, I really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars. I also read The Alchemist in April. Very famous book. I really enjoyed listening to this. It's about a boy searching for treasure and he meets all kinds of people on this journey, and yeah, I did like it. Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbett was the next book I read. I gave it 3.75 stars. I really like this book actually. It's a fun romance. Yeah, I love diving into Chloe Brown's head, and I know that I need to read the other 2 because I actually do have those. I read a non-fiction book by Pauline Armange? I don't know. It's French. I Hate Men, which is a book that I did enjoy. And as a feminist, I did like all the points that she talked about, but I feel like the approach was sometimes a bit poorly chosen. It sounded weird, but still gonna say it. The next one was, in the end, a bit disappointing for me. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I actually haven't heard anything about this book until I read it for book club, and while we talked about this inside book club, I really liked it. But while reading it, most of the time I was just confused because we jump through time, we jump through different heads. It's a book that you should not rush through, in my opinion, and I did rush through this book. I do want to experience that book again, but yeah, back then I only gave it 3 stars. I do think that if I listen to it again, I do think it will get more. Next one, which is on my list for the most disappointing books of the year, They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. I actually enjoyed listening to this book. So why is it on this list? It's simply because in reflection I felt no connection to the characters really, which is really weird. I build up a connection to certain characters so fast, but especially the romance part in this book fell flat for me. So yeah, I do think it's a good book, but for the expectations that I had, it kind of fell flat. And the last book I read in April was Film for Her by Orion Collado. I did like this book. It's a poetry and picture collection that she took, like photo collection. I did like this. It's not like my favorite poetry collection, and I do think it needed a bit more editing, but I did like it. Let's go to May. I read 6 books in May, which is not that much. I remember that month being very stressful. The first book I listened to was sadly an abridged version, but nevertheless, City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. This is the 6th part in the Mortal Instruments series. My favorite book, or one of my absolute favorite books. Yeah, it was fun re-experiencing it, and getting back to the characters that you loved for years is just always fun. Next one was a really fun romance that I liked. I gave this 3.75 stars, Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellefleur. I really like the sapphic romance. So if you're searching for a good sapphic romance that also has a bit of spice, I highly recommend this. I just wished I took more time listening to it. The next one was Felix Ever After, a book that also was very hyped, and I had huge expectations for this. That also kind of a bit fell flat, but I do want to say that I did enjoy this book, and I do think that the themes discussed in this book are very important, but I just sometimes found the decisions that the protagonist made a bit also poorly chosen. The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune was the next one. I gave this 5 stars. I talked a lot about this in many of my videos. I really loved it, and it also made my top 10. The next one is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This is a really nice story about a boy growing up, and it's all written in prose and in verse. I gave this 3 stars. Next one was Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers, a book that I can't remember a lot about, which is really sad. And I do think I need to listen to it again. I rushed through this in like a day, which is way too little time to spend with a book. So yeah, definitely need to read this again. I gave it 3 stars back then, but I do think that if I read it again, I would rate it differently. And the last one I read, which also made my top 10, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. 5 stars. Very hyped. But for me, it lived up to the expectations that I had. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. We are in the 6th month of the year, which is June. Okay, the first book I read was Der Fluch des Titanen, book 3 of the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. Sadly can't remember much of it because I did not attentively listen to this book, so I will spend some time with Percy next year. Definitely. The next one was Rick by Alex Gino. I really like this book. It's actually made for kids, but I did enjoy this. I gave this 3.5 stars. The next one I gave 4 stars, which is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penna. I first of all really loved the idea of the story, and I also loved the execution. Next one was Morris by Ian Forster. I told you about this book in my top 10 most disappointing books. It was just a bit too boring for me. Throughout the entire month I was listening to Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare, the first book in the Dark Artifice series. I love this book, I gave it 5 stars. And the last book I read was Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman, which is actually a sequel to Heartstopper. But you know, I don't mind spoilers at all, so yeah, I did enjoy this a lot. Let's get to the second half. I'm going to change positions again. The first book I read in July was Säkulum by Ursula Poznanski, a German thriller that I really liked. The next one was book 2 of the Dark Artifices series by Cassandra Clare, Lord of Shadows. Loved this book a lot. The ending was so horrible. I cried so much. I was not the same after this book. So yeah, 5 stars. Love. Another German book that I read that month was Die Stadt der träumenden Bücher by Walter Mörs. I gave this 3 stars. It was a bit slow paced for me. It was just a huge book. And again, my brain just doesn't focus or is very attentive when I read German, but I did enjoy this, especially while listening to the audiobook on YouTube, and the fantasy aspect in this book was just really fun. Second to last in that month was Uprooted, whatever, by Naomi Novik. I really enjoyed this book and I do think I have to read it again. And the last one that I read that month was Catching Fire, second part in the Hunger Games series by Susan Collins. I gave this 5 stars because I really liked it. I read the first one last year in December and it took me 6 months to finally read the second part. Coming to August. The first book I read was Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, because one of you guys actually sent me a link where I could read it or experience the graphic novel, and I loved it. Thank you so much, first of all. I gave this 4 stars. I can't wait for the show to come out next year. That's the only reason why I keep a Netflix subscription after they canceled Julie and the Phantoms. Not that they will see this. No, but I'm really excited about the series coming out. The next one was my highlight of the year, and you know it if you watched my top 10 books of 2021, Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, the last book in the Dark Artifices, which I gave 5 stars and which emotionally destroyed me. It was really tough to listen to. It was 30 hours of pain. The next one was a book that I really wanted to read for years. Chain of Gold, the first book in the Last Hour series by Cassandra Clare. I really loved this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I listened to this book and I need to read the second one, like, right now. I had some catching up to do with that universe anyway, so I also listened to Ghosts of the Shadow Market, which I gave 4.5 stars. I liked this a lot. 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes was also a book that I read. I really liked this. I gave this 3.75 stars. Next one was the most disappointing book of the year, Any Way the Wind Blows, number 3 in the Simon Snow trilogy by Rainbow Rowell. I can't tell you how much this book disappointed me, and I can't decide if I want to read this again or not, because I just hated the villain so much, and I hated the way that this story was concluded. The ending wasn't bad. Like, don't get me wrong, I did not expect this as a finale of a series that I actually really liked. So yeah, very disappointing. The next one was The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee, a book that I gave 3 stars, I think. A book that I do remember being fun, but also a book that I can barely remember stuff from because I listened to it so fast. That wasn't a time when I really pressured myself with reading lots of books and I was like, I need to listen to this audiobook and then to this audiobook, and like, horrible. You should not do that. I do think I want to experience this again because I actually really like the characters. I finally finished Good Wives in August, which I gave 3 stars by Louisa May Alcott. I did enjoy the continuation of the story of the 4 sisters that I dearly love, but it was very slow-paced, and that's why it took me so long. And also because I knew the story so well because of the movie. And I concluded the Hunger Games series by reading Mockingjay, and that by Susan Collins I gave this 4 stars, which I did not love as much as I did the other ones. Then I listened to We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, a book that I never really wanted to read, and then I saw it on BookBeat and I was like, okay, I'm gonna give it a try, and in the end it fell flat for me. Though I do think that the plot twist was okay, I guess. I just couldn't stand the protagonist. We arrived in September, a month in which I read 6 books, no, 7, and the first one was The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. That sometimes confused me because I didn't know who was speaking. I also recommend getting the copy to read and not only to listen to, but I did enjoy this. I gave this 4 stars. The next one was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, 4.5 stars. I talked a lot about it and I really love this book. I also read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier in this month, and I also filmed a vlog about Malibu Rising, Rebecca, and The Four Winds. I did enjoy Rebecca. It was a fun, mysterious novel, and The Four Winds was, though a very long, a very important story in my opinion, and I really like this. The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, and I gave this 4 stars. I reread Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, though I read it for the first time in the English version, and yeah, Harry Potter classic, I loved it. Hate the author. I also listened to Solitaire by Alice Oseman in this month. I gave this 3 stars. In the end, I think I would give it like 3.5 because I did enjoy the story, I did enjoy the characters, and I do think that the issues in this book are so important. But yeah, not my favorite by Alice Oseman. Loveless still is my favorite by her. And I reread I Would Leave Me If I Could by Halsey. I actually read this like every month. But that was the month I really like read it. Okay, 3 more months, guys. October is a very short month because I only finished 2 books, which were Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which I loved, 5 stars. Could have gone into my top 10, by the way, or honorable mentions. Totally forgot about it, but I loved it. And I reread The Picture of Dorian Gray, and we know how I feel about that. So let's continue with November. The first was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I did like. It was 3.5 for me. After that, I read The Lighthouse Witches by C.J. Cook, which became a favorite. I love this book. I talked a lot about this book, and I'm really happy that I found it. 5 stars for me. I had to read a lot for school that month, and the first one was Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. That's a play that I enjoyed. I gave this 3.5 stars, and I actually watched it while simultaneously reading it. I finally finished a book that I started in October and November. Misery by Stephen King. I gave it 4 stars. It was such a fun horror thriller. I still haven't watched the movie. I also reread Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe in that month. Again, I think I loved it even more the second time that I read it. And I also read a non-fiction book in this month, which was Es kann nur eine geben by Caroline Kebekus, a book all about feminism and how if there was ever a woman in anything, you can almost guarantee that most of the time it's only one. Yeah, I did enjoy this. I listened to the audiobook, which was really, really cool. I read my first Sally Rooney, which was Normal People. I gave this 3.75 stars. I liked it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, and I'm really happy that I read it. I feel like it's a book that almost everyone has read. I did not know that I would read it, but I had to for class. So yeah, another book I also enjoyed. And the last one was a play, A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare, which I absolutely love, which I also had to read for class. We're now going through all the books that I read in December, and I'm not going to talk too much about them, but you can expect a December wrap up, if not in the end of this week, in the beginning of the next. So make sure to check that out. The first book that I read was another play by William Shakespeare. I finally read and experienced Hamlet. I really liked it, although A Midsummer Night's Dream is still my favorite. Why am I holding my foot? I don't know. I finally read Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. I know I'm speaking very fast right now, but I'm so tired and I can't speak anymore, and I'm also very hungry. This is the second part, which was released 9 years after the first one, and I'm so happy that the author wrote another one. I love this so much, and it also made my top 10. I finally read Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. I loved it so much, and I will tell you more about it in my wrap up. The next one is Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare, another play that I had to read for class. And I really, really loved this. This is a comedy, and I really, really like this. It was so much fun, and I also watched it on stage while reading it. The next one were 2 very, very short stories. The first one being a book for kids, which is Before We Sleep by Paolo. I'm so embarrassed, I don't know how to say his last name. And Giorgio Volpe. I don't know. It's a very cute story for children. And the audiobook was like 4 minutes. And the second one was A Christmas Tragedy, a short story by Agatha Christie. This is one of the Miss Marple short stories. I saw this on BookBeat and listened to it because it was Christmas themed, and it's also Agatha Christie, an author who I do plan reading a lot from next year. And I did like this. I'm not going to talk too much again about these books. A classic that I finished on Christmas Eve, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I loved this very, very much, and I also loved the movie. And the last book that I finished a few hours before I filmed was Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. A classic story that I did enjoy, but again, you get all the information in my December wrap-up. That's coming in the first week, probably, or maybe in the second week, give me some time, of January. Those are all the books that I read. I can't talk anymore, guys. I talked for over an hour now. There's a huge possibility that I will finish 1 or maybe even 2 books before the year ends. And if you want to know more about them, you need to watch my December wrap-up. Okay, guys. I'm so happy that it's over. Oh god, okay. I hope you liked this, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up and comment down below what you would like to see next. Tomorrow there's a really fun video coming out, so make sure to not miss that. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, and don't forget to click the little bell next to the subscription button to never miss an upload. Tell me about some of the books that you read this year that you thought were great. Let me know how many books you read this year, or what your reading goal next year is. I don't know how many books I want to read next year. Currently, I don't really know when I upload videos, so make sure to follow me on my Instagram to get all the updates. All my social media is linked down below, including my poetry account on Instagram, so. Other than that, I'm going to get something to eat. I'm starving. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!